So in our last video, we got our basic thread up and running. Not a ton of lines of code here. I say we just got really 4 lines of code we wrote inside of the main method, and inside the counter, again, another 4 lines of code. Our issue is, how do we know which thread is which? Or how do we just basically customize the behavior here? In a thread, I can't pass in any data. I can't go to here and say run string name. Let's say I want to name the thread. Because all of a sudden, I'm no longer overriding the run method. I'm no longer implementing the runnable interface. And so it doesn't work anymore. I don't have a runnable interface that allows us to do that. I can't change that. So what do I do instead? I can create attributes of my class. Because you have to remember, the intent of a thread is to run the set of instructions a single time. And so when in runnable, I can create a class that basically is a one-shot run. Think of it as, like I'm going to send you out on a race. And for that race, you're going to run a certain distance, and you're going to get a certain time, and you're going to finish at a certain place. And every time you do another race, you'll have a different distance, a different time, a different place that you'll finish in. And so I have a scorecard for each one of those. Same sort of thing here. So I'm going to start at the beginning, go to the end, and end up with some stats in the middle. I can do the same thing where I have a counting runnable, and I'm going to name it. All right. So for the name, I can just put it as an attribute of this. Now, how do I set an attribute? Well, there's 2 options. The one option is getters and setters. But the problem with getters and setters is I have to make sure I've done that before I start the thread. And I could change during the life cycle of the thread. If I don't want that to happen, then I don't want to put it as a getter and setter. So the better option is a constructor. In NetBeans, there's a fairly simple way, if I have some attributes, to build a constructor. I can I hit Alt Insert, or I can right click the same way and say right click insert code. All right, and I can build a constructor, top one of the list there. All right, and constructor using the name attribute. And so now, in order to build a counting runnable, I must name my thread. That's a requirement right there. I must name my thread. All right, so when I come back to my main class here, the counting runnable no longer compiles because I'm not naming it. So here, when I name this guy, I name it as being, quite simply, the thread 1, let's call it. Now, down here, I can run it. This is not going to help me because I'm going to be named as counter.run. It's going to be running the same name inside of here. Again, I don't want to run this class in any way except for as a thread. It's confusing to do that. So the better answer here is to create 2 of these guys. All right, so let's make some space and create a second one, counter2 inside of here, and say thread 2 inside of here. Okay, and then I need to make a second thread here. T2 deals with counter 2, and then I need to start T1 and T2. Oops, not T3. That's not what I'm looking at. T2. All right, so now I'm building 2 instances of these, and I'm differentiating my 2 instances by creating individual threads in each one of these guys. All right. So now that I have 2 threads and I go and run 2 threads, we can see, oh, I forgot, it's running slightly differently here. You can actually see it there. But what I forgot to do is I actually forgot to use my name. So let's do that here. Let's come back here and say name plus, and then we'll put a space plus I. So when we count, we're going to put the name in front of the space inside there. Okay, so let's run it one more time. We can see. There we go. Much better. So thread 1, if I come back to my demo, is the first one to start. It's the last one to finish in this case. If I come back up top, so thread 1 starts and it prints out 1 number, and then thread 2 starts. It prints out 1 and 2. Then thread 1 gets its turn to print out number 2. And then thread 2 gets its chance to turn number 3. So you can see it's actually bouncing back and forth quite a bit to get started with here. It just keeps bouncing back and forth. Thread 1, thread 2. Oh, and then at some point, the Java virtual machine decides to give thread 2 a big run at it. So thread 2 does a bunch of work, all the way up to 40, while thread 1's still at 20. And then again, they bounce back and forth, and thread 1 finally finishes, thread 2 finally finishes there, and thread 1's only at 59, then thread 1 finishes its way out. If I run this again, the results are going to be different pretty much every single time. The second time, thread 2 finishes much, much later. Oh yeah, so thread 1, wow, thread 1 finished and thread 2 is only at 16 at that point. I run it again, I get a different result. Thread 2 finishing again, pretty close that time. There's just a slight difference inside of there. So this is a little bit better insight into that threading behavior. It allows us to customize that thread class a little bit, and we can do better than just customizing the name. I can customize any feature inside of here. I can say private int start, private int finish. All right, and so I can make this whatever behavior I want inside of here, and I can either add this in by hand or I can actually create a different constructor. So let's set it. The default of starting is 1, the default of finishing is 100, and let's change that behavior down below. So I go from start to finish inside of here, and let's add another constructor. I'm going to hold down Alt and hit Insert, add a constructor. Oops. Oh, it's not giving me the options of the other two. Why isn't it giving the option? Maybe it's because they're initialized. Let me take that out real quick, see if that helps. Hold on one second. Alt Insert, constructor. Yeah, see, there you go. For some reason it was initialized, so I didn't want to do that. But I can put in all three, and now I can put the initial values back. So, as I've initialized this guy 1 to 100, as you can see, I've changed my, instead of hard coding it 1 to 100, I made it go from start to finish. If I run it, they both go 1 to 100 just like they did before. But I can now go into my thread demo. Let's say thread 2, I want to start at 101 and go to 200. I can do start and finish inside of here. And so when I do my threading counting, thread 2 then goes to 200. Thread 1 still went to 100. That's the default inside of here. So let's just go up the top. Thread 2 started at 101. So I can customize my thread object by using constructors. I can add in whatever data I want to using constructors. Again, I can do it through other mechanisms as well. It's just constructors ensure that data is hidden, it's encapsulated, and it stays consistent throughout the entire run of the thread. And that's the best controlled scenario inside of that. I don't want the thread necessarily to be dynamic as it goes. There could be situations where you do want it. If you have a video game, you have some configuration options, maybe the user can pause the game, change those configuration options, and you want to reset those into the thread as it's running. That could be legitimate. But for now, for our purposes, that's not what we're looking for. We're looking for just simply hiding that information, encapsulating that information. That's how I do it within a thread object. So there's another step towards getting us to the answer. We're not entirely finished yet, but at least now we have a feel for what the basic threading capabilities are. How do I construct a basic thread? So you should be building this now. You should take the time, without any care of the actual server and the actual work that we're doing with sockets and stuff like that, and try and build out the threading stuff. Try and get a feel for this working on its own. So as I go and move it into the server, you can have a good feel for what I'm doing differently than just the basic threading. I know how threads work. Now I'm just adding that new functionality inside of it.